Hello and welcome to Two Girls in the Pod. I am Sharon.
I'm Christy.
And we are super excited to have Stepahanie Izaguirre on today. Stepahanie is a immigration attorney, but sounds like you've been branching out a little bit and doing some other stuff. So please welcome.
Thank you.
One of the things we do on our podcast is we really talk to people about their journeys, but like what brings people to be, because did you start out wanting to do an immigration law? Where were you at? Tell us your story, man.
All right. In one way, it's a really straight line because my father was an attorney. I watched him be an attorney and I thought, oh, I would be good at that. But he has nothing to do with immigration. He'd never worked with immigration. I grew up in Minnesota. My parents had been to Canada. I think my mom went to Europe once when I was little, and my parents had been to Canada, but like we were not world travelers. I have almost no immigrants in my background. But hold on, I want to make sure. Do you want me to tell you like my whole story?
As much as you want to share.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. Okay. So when I was in college, I had a friend who was in ROTC and she was doing super cool stuff like jumping out of helicopters and like doing land navigation in the middle of the night and like running around the college campus. And I was just like, oh, like that looks really cool. I want to do that. And they paid for my college. And so I ended up in the Army for 4 years after I graduated from college. And I very quickly realized the Army was not for me. Like I learned.
It lost its appeal.
I think fundamentally as a woman, it's very difficult to be your true self and be in the Army. So I learned a ton about leadership. I learned a ton about management. I got to do some amazing things. I was in charge of 40 people when I was 21 years old. I mean, like I had some cool experiences, but I felt like every morning when I got up, I was putting on a mask. And yeah, and it's like I had back then you were required to either have short hair or like braid your hair or like have it up off your collar. And so I felt like every morning I would like braid my hair and then that was the mask. And like I was like Army Stepahanie until I could come home and like take off my uniform. And I felt like the guys like they didn't have that, right? Like they were themselves, like whether they were in uniform or out of uniform. But I had this mask feeling. And so I got to this point where I was driving to work one morning and there was a street sign over here. And I was like, if I crash my car into this street sign, I don't have to go to work today. And like, I don't want to kill myself. Like, but
I just don't want to go to work.
I just don't want to go to work.
That's pretty bad.
Right? Yeah. And so I was like, no, like I can't do that. It would be expensive. I should just go to work. But like, that really stuck with me. And I was having a ton of like health problems at that time. And I realized that if I stayed past a certain point, I was committed for a year. But if I got out the day before, I was free. And so I had always wanted to go to law school, but I wanted to make sure that that was what I wanted to do and not just like what my dad had done. So I wasn't just like following him. Right. So I was sort of faced with this, like, I can't stand being in the Army anymore. It's like literally physically killing me. And I got out pretty quickly without a plan. I took a job as like an executive recruiter for a while. Also didn't like that. And I wasn't very good at that. I'm terrible at sales. And so I looked around and I was like, I think I want to go to law school. But by the time I went, I had lived in South Korea for a year. I'd lived in Brazil for a year and a half. I traveled all over South America. And I was really lucky to get a job at the US consulate in Rio de Janeiro working on immigration stuff.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Yeah. And I loved it. I was just like a military spouse, wife. So I didn't have any actual like foreign service training or anything, but they were short people. And so they were like, sure, you can sit in the window, you can interview people for visas, and we'll just review your decisions to make sure they're good ones. This was pre 9/11.
Yeah.
And I loved it. And so immigration law, it turns out it's this like connection or like crossroads of people from all over the world, which I find other cultures totally fascinating. It's like a puzzle like immigration law is probably second in complexity only to tax law. So,
Oh, geez.
Oh, wow.
right? So it's extremely complex. And like every time there's an immigration reform, some stuff is added, some stuff is taken away.
Right.
And so the other thing that I loved was that my clients, the people that I was working with, were really just like people like me, but they had made this incredibly difficult decision to like leave their home, leave their language, leave their culture. And so I loved the puzzle aspect of it, like putting the pieces together to find a solution for them. I felt like they were generally like really great people to find a solution for. Like I felt really good about myself when I helped them through this problem.
Mhm.
When my kids were little, you know, I thought about continuing on with the foreign service and like, you know, living all over the world, but I really wanted my kids to feel like they were from somewhere. So immigration law was a way to have the world come to me.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you find it interesting how we have these ideas in our head about this is my path and this is what I'm going to do? And we have those pivotal moments where we get that opportunity that we don't even think about, and a whole new world opens up to us.
Yeah, you know, my daughter is 18 now. She's a freshman in college. And she has been so stressed the last year or two about her path and like where she goes to school and what she's going to do and making the right decisions. And, you know, I keep telling her, looking back on my life, I never got off the right path. Like I didn't know what the right path was, but I was always on it. And so, you know, I've just been trying to reassure her with this idea that like these moments will come and you'll make your decisions and then you'll end up in the right place for you.
And all of those experiences will contribute.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, you know, anytime I work with people and we talk about that, and they're always this pressure to know. And I'm always like, well, what happens if you don't? Does the world end? I don't get it. You know, why are you so stressed when when I work with kids, you know, oh my God, they're talking to me about colleges. I don't even know what I'm going to do next week. How am I going to know what I'm going to do? And they're like, just breathe. Nobody cares.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
but I think we have that pressure. And I think probably at any age, you know, what are you going to do when you grow up?
Sure.
Kind of mentality, you know. And I think the thing that we run into is that when we just sit back and we enjoy the ride a little bit, when we start to look and do the things we love, then those things come to us anyway. Right? Isn't that right? Look at us here doing a
Yeah.
podcast. Never had that in our vision at all.
I mean, I suppose everybody's different, but I'm not shocked that my kids really, really want to know because I think I'm like that too.
Maybe a little.
Right? And so it's a little bit hypocritical of me to be like, oh, just you'll figure it out. Like you're on the right path, no matter what, you can't get off the right path, when I was also very anxious about that. But looking backwards, I can see that yes, I was on the right path.
See, now you have that wisdom to
Right.
share with them because you experienced it, and having the anxiety didn't make you get on your path any faster. I'm just saying.
That's wise. Okay, yeah, that's
It didn't help.
You know, the other thing that I think about a lot is I have ended up in immigration, which is a very female heavy area of the law. I'm not exactly sure why.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, lots of
Huh.
women practice immigration law. And then my other area that I work in is I work as a guardian ad litem for children.
Okay, explain what a guardian ad litem is, because
Yeah.
you know that's kind of a foreign language to some people.
Okay, so a guardian ad litem is an attorney who is appointed, and I suppose it's different in every state, but here in Colorado, a guardian ad litem is appointed to represent the best interests of a child. And until last year, the definition of child included kids from birth up to 18. The challenging, but it also really cool thing about it is you're essentially required to do not what the child wants, not what their parents want, not what their foster parent wants, but what you think is the best thing for that child. And so it involves a lot of really wrestling with like, who am I to decide what's best for this child? But also, you know, usually if you're in that role, it's because there's some question about whether or not their parents are making those decisions for them. And so it feels like a huge responsibility to me. I really enjoy it. I should add that last January, Colorado kind of divided children under 12 still have a guardian ad litem. Children 12 and older now have what's called counsel for youth, and that's just like a regular attorney where you just kind of do what your client wants.
And I think it's kind of interesting because, I've worked with GALs a lot in my career, and sometimes having that person who's outside the situation, because you kind of need, as a therapist, that's what we do. We come in and our job is to be more, to not have that bias or that buying into these things. And that's what the GAL does. I think they really have that ability to step away and look at a bigger picture, and I don't think it's so much what the GAL wants, but I really do think it really is, when I'm looking at this picture from the outside, where's this child going to thrive?
Yeah, for
You know.
sure.
And I think at the end of the day, whether it's because it's a team, when you're talking about this, you usually have a therapist, you have the GAL, you usually have DHS involvement,
Mhm.
So therefore there's that lawyer for DHS, and there's a court involved. And of
Yes,
course, then there's the parents involved and anybody else, foster care, it's a whole team. And I think that's why it's good to have all of those components in those things so that you can then bounce those ideas off of each other. And I think then you can conceptualize better for the kid,
and I think, yesterday I drove to Walsenburg, Monte Vista, Trinidad, Valdez, Colorado, Aguilar, Colorado, and then came home in the snow.
Wow.
See, I don't know if I'd have that dedication.
Well, it's more that I have to visit these kids and they all live far away, so it just kind of makes sense to do it all like in one day,
Mhm.
Once again, more days. Oh yeah, I'm at the end of my career, maybe earlier on, but no.
Well, I always try to I have a social worker who goes with me as she works with me, and we try to make it a fun day, and it's a good opportunity to kind of digest the dynamics that we see when we're in the car kind of on the way home. But it can be kind of a heavy day also, because it's like all these kids and all these families, and none of them are, sometimes they're moving in the right direction, but it's just a lot of mental health issues, poverty, drug addiction that usually stems from mental health issues. So it's kind of a lot to carry with you.
Right. I think that's what it is. And I think even when we look at those kind of cases, sometimes, some people are doing the best that they can with what they have, and then trying to change generational mentality is so huge. And I think you run into that a lot. It's just that, once again, I think sometimes they just don't know anything better. And then you just have some of those who maybe don't need to be parents too, that's every once in a while too.
Yeah. Yesterday, friend of a father told me some things about the father that happened to him when he was a child. And I'll admit that I don't like this father very much because of some of the things that he's done to his wife and children. But man, after hearing what happened to him when he was 9 years old, it's like, oh.
And that's one of the things I tell people. One of the things we love about the podcast is everybody has a story.
Mhm.
And, when we look at people, we're looking from such a small lens into somebody else's life. And until we actually sit down and talk with them, and, we've met I think some amazing people on our podcast.
Yeah.
And to hear their stories, why did you start doing this? If I didn't, I was going to go to jail. Things like that, but really to have those stories and to know that at the end of the day, there's hope to change your life trajectory anytime you want to. And you have you have to have the people, you have to have the resources too. You can't just do it on your own. I think that's where that comes in, when you have those teams to help you become more successful,
And I realize it doesn't always work this way, but when you have a good caseworker and you have a good GAL and you have parents who want to make changes, our system here in Colorado is actually very supportive, I think, of helping parents and reuniting children with parents. Hopefully not as shame-based as maybe this system was previously. Somebody told me once, and I don't know if this is true, that having a child removed from you is one of the most shame-inducing events that can happen.
And the reason why is because good, bad, or ugly, a parent role, the idea that society has placed on the role of a parent is anytime, it's even like getting people to come into parenting. Why? What do I need? And I always tell people it's not an insult to you. And when I run parenting classes, I would always tell them, y'all are in here and you're doing the best job you possibly can with what you have.
Yeah.
We're just going to learn some new skills. But it is because it's that role that you're supposed to know what you're doing. It's this elevated role because it's the most important job you're going to ever do in your entire life.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So when somebody then goes and takes your kid, now what they've told you is, you're pretty shitty.
It's the most important thing in your entire life.
Exactly. So I understand that. And, so, you even have to work through all of that kind of stuff. So it kind of makes sense. So immigration to jail, what?
So, what's really interesting about that is the literal way that happened was I had several teenagers coming into my office. This was probably 10 to 15 years ago. And if I was able to get them a guardian here in the United States, a legal guardian, then I was able to qualify them for a green card. Basically, they could stay in the United States. And the first couple that came to me, they didn't speak English. They were actually, I think, indigenous Guatemalans. So Spanish was actually their second language.
Mhm.
And so I just said, well, here's the name of the 3 people in Colorado that I know that do guardianships. And not surprisingly, they weren't able to navigate that. Right. And so I think they probably had the money, but just like finding the person and explaining what they wanted and how it needed to happen and the tweaks that they needed for the immigration case. And so I just said, well, I'm going to learn it myself. I'll figure it out because I'm tired of seeing these teenagers get screwed by the system because I don't know how to do something. And so my very first case, I had a law license in North Carolina where I lived for a while, but not Colorado. And so I did all the research. I filled out all the forms for this family that actually lived in Alamosa. I helped them file it, but I couldn't file it as their attorney because I wasn't a Colorado attorney yet. And so I drove down to Alamosa and we started the hearing and I essentially stood behind the bar because I was not an attorney. And I just kind of said, excuse me, Your Honor, like, this is who I am and this is what I want. And he was so friendly. Like, he was like, come on up here, talk into the microphone. And once I explained what I was trying to do, he was like, oh, I've never heard of that before. But of course I will grant what you're asking for. So I eventually got my Colorado law license, learned how to do guardianship cases anywhere. And then the magistrate in charge of guardianships here in El Paso County in Colorado asked me if I'd be willing to work as a GAL for adults because I spoke Spanish. And I had never done that before, but I said, sure, I'd be willing to try. And I enjoyed it. I realized pretty quickly that I'd probably rather be working with children. And to work with children in Colorado, it requires special training and you have to get a special contract from the Office of the Child Representative because we don't just let any lawyer represent kids. And so I approached them and I said, hey, I speak Spanish. I've worked with these children from Guatemala, a fair number at that point. And they said, sure, we'd love to have you. And so I initially started doing just guardianships. And then they needed an attorney to do guardianships in Pueblo. And so I said, sure, I'll be happy to do that down south. And then they were like, hey, we also need a guardian ad litem to do dependency and neglect cases. So like child welfare or like CPS, which is not what it's called here. And so I said, sure, like I'll be willing to try that. It's like a whole new area of the law, but I really liked it. So by then I was like working here in Colorado Springs, working in Pueblo, like doing those 2 different kinds of cases, the cases up here, my immigration cases. I was kind of like, how did this happen? Like, how did I end up in these like really different areas of the law? But it hit me one day that I think I just have a call to like help vulnerable populations of people.
Okay.
And so I don't think that representing children or immigrants is like very like, it's not like a sexy law job. Like it's not necessarily something that people are like, oh, I want to, like that's what I want, or I'm going to make a ton of money doing that. But I like my clients, which nobody tells you in law school to think about that. Like you're going to spend a lot of time with your clients. So make sure your clients are people that you enjoy helping because I mean, there's nothing wrong with criminal law, but it's like, then your clients are all criminals probably, or accused criminals, we could say. I like helping kids. I like hoping that I made a difference at a difficult time in their lives. And the same thing with my immigration clients. Like they're all, what I see they have in common is that they all want a better life for themselves and they need a little bit of help going in that direction, and I can help them.
So in the immigration law, is that, do you work mostly with youth within that as well, or?
It sort of has ended up being that way. I specialize in what we call family immigration. So that would be immigration benefits based on a family relationship with somebody. And then also what we kind of consider in a big group of like humanitarian cases. And so I am pretty sure that I do. So this process where you get a kid, a guardian, and then you get them a green card, it's called special immigrant juvenile status. And I have a feeling, I mean, there's no way to check, but I'm pretty sure that I do more of those cases in Southern Colorado than anybody else. There are other attorneys who do them, but I've done them in Denver, Colorado Springs, all the southern counties, and I enjoy it.
Nice.
I think a lot of people have a misconception about immigration and that they're.
Oh yeah,
I
hit
don't-
me up with this because I love these
Well,
questions.
I think that people don't understand there really is a vetting process. There is a lot of stuff that goes on
Yes.
for somebody to come into this country. Talk just a little bit about that.
You know, I was asked by a church group actually to come talk to them next month, I think, about like what is an illegal immigrant and like what does that mean?
Yeah, because I think that's a great question.
Yeah. So it's actually a really, really complicated answer. So there are, when you think about like who's coming into the United States, for example, and let's just start with like the airport, like people who come or people who come across, well, I don't want to even use the word legal, but like in a normal way, we could say. So you have US citizens at the airport who have to be allowed into the country. You have green card holders who have permission from this country. They've been vetted, checked, everything. They are generally always allowed to come and go as long as they don't stay outside the United States for more than 6 months or they haven't committed certain crimes. And then you have what we call non-immigrant visitors or non-immigrant visa options. So student visas, tourist visas, work visas, but like temporary. You're allowed to be here for a certain period, for a certain purpose, and you're expected to go home. So those people, if they come and they stay too long, I guess they technically, I would say they're documented. I mean, they entered with documentation. They have documents, but they fall out of legal status because maybe they were authorized to be here as long as they had a certain job or for a 6-month period or as long as they were in school. And if they stay longer, then they're technically out of status.
Okay.
Now, there are things that they can do to fix that status, but not everybody is going to have that option. So like you could maybe get another job or you could maybe get married to someone from here. Usually you get married not with the intention of fixing your status.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
But you
throw that
have to
out
get
there.
married and like that's just a solution.
Like the person.
Right, exactly. So there are people here who are out of status and will never be able to get back into status. And then there are people who are out of status, but maybe the facts of their life, the circumstances of their life will change and they're able to get back into status. Okay, so that's everybody who came with documentation.
Gotcha.
Then we have what I think most people think of as illegal immigration, and I'm putting that in quotes.
Okay.
Because so kind of the most illegal situation or the most, not in accordance with the law is someone who just walks across the border. And they have no papers, they have no opportunity to stay here. They just, and 9 times out of 10, those people are either fleeing, looking for a better life, or they're maybe like what we call economic refugees, and they're just looking for a way to support their family. Then there are the people who cross the border, get caught by Border Patrol, and Border Patrol either makes a decision to maybe deport them immediately because of past criminal history or past deportations, or some of that happened during COVID. I think it was called Title 42. There are other people that the Border Patrol stops, they assess them, they're considered to not be a threat, and they release them. And so I would say that those people are in our country legally because our government made the decision to release them into the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? So like they don't have a permanent status. Those people are normally pending some other administrative proceeding, but they're known, the government knows who they are. The government made the decision to let them in. And normally, like I said, that's like pending like a deportation hearing or an asylum hearing or something else. And then there's another category of people who essentially come to the border and they say, I don't have any documentation, but I am afraid that I'm going to be killed, or this happened to me in my country. I'm asking for asylum. And that is generally another group of people that are processed at the border and then released into the United States pending some further proceeding. So as you can see, it's really complicated, and there's no document, like there's no like one document that shows somebody, this is my immigration status.
Well, that would explain why there might be some confusion. Because I think sometimes people, when they talk about, illegal immigrants coming to the United States and we have a border patrol there, and not understanding they may be coming in contact with border patrol even at that point.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Most, I would say 95% of the people that I talk to that have arrived in the last 2 years came into contact with Border Patrol. They were processed, released, and they're now pending some other proceeding.
So there is like a process to this. So even if they come in pending, even like to get a green card and all of that, there's a lot of paperwork you have to submit. There are certain specific things you have to fall into these categories in order to get the green card as well.
Yes. Most people who I would consider recent arrivals are like people who are coming across the border. Generally, the majority of them are not going to qualify for a permanent status here unless there's some kind of change in their situation while they're here. So at the moment that they come in, they don't really qualify.
Gotcha.
But they have an opportunity to kind of talk to somebody like me, review their options. And if there's something that they potentially might qualify for, we can try to help them get that. Many times, the bar to be able to ask is like really low. The bar to be able to stay is pretty high. And so the Border Patrol releases a large number of people with the knowledge that many of them will not be able to jump over that high bar to be able to stay.
So then they have to leave the country anyway.
Yes, and they are supposed to. We actually do not have a good system in this country of monitoring outgoing immigration. We're really good at incoming immigration. We're not very good at outgoing. And so, yeah, we don't have, if you've ever been to one of those countries where you have to go to immigration to leave the country, we don't have that here. And so what that means is that it's pretty easy for people once they get in to stay.
So it's like people are investing in keeping them out of the country when the investment really should be in once they get that temporary whatever, to then that should be the follow-up of how they get back out of the country. So we don't, there's not, okay. So you're right, there's a lot of stuff to this immigration that I don't think people understand.
Yeah.
Well, and I think the really hard thing, like if you want to look from like a 60,000 foot perspective at our immigration system is built on, so for wealthy people and educated people, there are visa options. Okay. But our economy needs wealthy people, educated people, but it also needs less educated people who are willing to do really difficult jobs that nobody in the United States really wants to do. Think like housekeeping in hotels, construction,
Oh, my goodness, field work.
yes, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When everybody loves to say our immigration system is broken, the real way that it's broken, or one of the ways in which it is broken, is that we are very happy to kind of look the other way and let poor people and uneducated people do really difficult work in this country. And we expect them to live in the shadows. We expect them to not get benefits that other people get. But our system doesn't actually work to keep them out. And our economy needs them, right? So like our economy is desperate for workers. And because of that, everybody just kind of looks the other way because it's a huge problem. It's too difficult to manage. If we had hey, I just want to go work in the United States and do construction for 2 years, those visas would go in a heartbeat, right? Like people would be very happy to come here, work hard for 2 years, take that money home and be able to see their family. But since we don't have a way for these kind of like, I don't like to use the word unskilled, but think like unskilled laborers, because we don't have a way for those people to go back and forth, they're stuck here. And then once they get here, they buy cars and then they buy houses and then they get married and then they have children. And suddenly like their whole life is here and now they don't want to go back anymore. And so we do have mechanisms for those people to eventually normalize their status. But it's difficult, it's expensive. And I really think that the pro-business, we don't want a bunch of foreigner coalition in this country would really, really be smart, not to get political, but, but like it would be really smart to create some kind of program that lets unskilled workers come here legally, lets them work because our economy needs the workers, and then lets them go home and lets them take what they've earned. You know, President Bush actually proposed something like this back when he was president, and it never went anywhere. I think post 9/11, nobody wants to talk about that kind of stuff because I think kind of scared of immigrants.
Yeah, well, I do think it's interesting. It seems like, just when you're sitting there and you're thinking, and even about the economy of the United States, because a lot of the people who are working here, the migrant workers, they still come here, they still pay tax here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, especially
So-
if they're buying items, like you were saying about buying cars and all of that, aren't they having to pay taxes on all of that? And I know that's one of the biggest complaints with people, it seems.
And I think that many of those people don't pay taxes because they don't have a social security number, because you have to have legal status to get a social security number. Income tax, I should say they don't pay income tax. You can get an ITIN number. It's a challenge, but I have so many clients who have an ITIN number, and
What is that?
it's a social security number for people who don't qualify for a social security number.
Okay.
So it's a tax identification
It's a number? Okay.
individual tax identification number. And just like any business has like an EIN. So a person who
Oh, okay.
doesn't have a social
Mhm.
can use a TIN or an ITIN. The point is, I have so many clients who would love to pay taxes if they could. And they're kind of anxious to show that they're trying to do everything they can to do things the right way. Unfortunately, I kind of started to say this and I got kind of off topic, but like our system is based on employment, family relationships, and hardship. So if
Okay.
you are a good person you have no criminal history, you've paid your taxes, that is not enough. You have to have a family relationship with someone from the United States. And then you generally have to show some kind of hardship, like they're going to suffer without you here. And so like good, independent, hardworking immigrants who don't have those factors generally don't qualify. So like our immigration system is not at all about how good you are or like how worthy you are or what you can contribute to this country. We actually reward, and that's in quotes, people who have hardship, which also doesn't make sense because you have this group of people complaining about, oh, these people are getting benefits and they're taking away from the rest of us. And it's like, well, if we had a system that was based on, say, lack of a criminal record and paying your taxes, then we wouldn't be rewarding people who have this hardship.
Well, I guess, let's be fair, once again, I've heard this, because I've worked with impoverished people who are on, welfare and stuff, and people will complain about the people on welfare. I always say it's interesting is I always tell people, do you understand everybody pays into welfare? It is not, it's just kind of like our social security. We all pay into it. We pay into welfare, we pay into unemployment, we pay into all of these things. It's one pot, but yet we will identify that because of, once again, that perception of poverty, And I had a professor who I love when he said it's in sociology. He said, if you have money, you look down on the people who don't. So because then it kind of helps you to have better social status.
Sure.
So it becomes this really weird dynamic that we have, and not just in the United States, I think just in general with people, when we look at the social classes and things like that. I think it's the same thing, when we look at people, once again, if they have hardship, and then you want to help them out of the hardship so they can become better. It's kind of like people in the United States who are on welfare. Stop giving handouts. It's not handout. I just, everybody needs a hand every once in a while. At some point, and sometimes if you're really wealthy, guess what? Sometimes you inherited that wealth. So that was your handout, or you partnered with somebody who had a good idea. All of those are the same thing. But yet when we look at it on that upper echelon, we view it as somehow different. And it's not to me. But then, I'm a therapist, I'm all about helping the next person. Now, I don't know.
Well, it doesn't make sense. Most of the time, the children that we're talking about are like US citizen children, right? And so of course, they're entitled to the same benefits as all other US citizen children. But taking their parents away from them is not, it does not help this country at all. It makes things worse, actually.
Well, because now we got to take care of the kids.
Yes.
So
yes.
So we're going to put more money into that child, then
Yes. So to be
it's hard for people
super stereotypical, let that dad stay here and work and support his family, right? Because he is going to take better care of his family than food stamps and Section 8 housing are, and then the rest of us just have to pay into these benefits. Whereas that dad would love to take care of his kids and would probably love to make sure they're not receiving benefits. So immigration is hard.
It sounds like it. And it's it's one of those things, especially now when we look at the whole situation with the border and everything. But and I guess the thing is when you're talking immigration, I think a lot of people only think of immigration of our southern borders. They really do not understand that immigration is, we have people coming in from all different countries to the United States.
Yes.
Yeah. But we focus on one, and I don't, maybe it's because it is our border. I don't know, maybe Canadians don't want to come here. I don't know. I don't know how this works.
I think it's harder to get a visa to fly into Canada. And there are many countries, Mexico being a poorer country has more relaxed entrance requirements. I would agree the southern border is a problem. Nothing in my work is working towards a solution at the southern border because it's a multi-country, billions of dollars kind of problem. I kind of decided a few years ago to focus on kind of my community, and that kind of fits in with my Guardian Ad Litem work as well. So if you are a member of my community, meaning that you live here, and I don't really care how long you've lived here, but if you live here, I might be a good solution for you to help you fix your immigration problem. In the past, I have gone to the border. I've helped people at the border. I've helped people who are detained at the border, but I kind of decided that what really kind of energizes me is this feeling of helping my community. And I also think that it's important to realize that our community is made up of people who are going through the immigration process or who are here without legal status. And so you might not realize it, but we all run into undocumented immigrants or people who don't have permanent legal status every day. They're working all around you.
Absolutely. And it's unlegal. They don't have their documentation from countries all over the world.
Yes. Yeah.
It really is. I think you're right. When you have a border that, it's land connected, so you can travel that way. When it's, you have to go over an ocean, it's a little bit different.
Yeah.
So, and I understand it, and I understand both sides of it, and I understand why there has to be some sense of how do we handle this in a way in which we're not being demeaning to other human beings. My thing is, I don't care who we are. When we start being demeaning to other human beings, that's when it becomes something else. If we have an immigration problem, let's call it an immigration problem, and let's work at it from those kind of places of what kind of laws do we implement, what kind of policies can we put into place, but not to demean the very people that I always tell people, everybody, and you're right. I always tell my clients, and there's, oh man, the world's going crazy and all that. I said, no, pause. Look out your window. Is your neighbor doing it? What is your neighbor doing? They're shoveling their snow, just like we did this morning.
Mm-hmm.
They don't, it's not that. I said, what we're doing, I said, is we take care of it in our home, to our community, and then we reach out and we continue on that process, kind of like what you said. But the thing is that I don't have to do that by demeaning somebody else.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. We have to keep that human compassion, understand what you're fighting is not the people coming in, you're fighting policy.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And if people would understand that it's a policy, not the people,
Mm-hmm.
it is policy.
I am going to El Salvador next month. I'm not 100% sure what's going to happen, but my husband and I are hoping to meet the president of El Salvador. His name is Nayib Bukele. And I don't know how much you know about El Salvador, but most of my experience with El Salvador until the last couple of years has been people fleeing dreadful, like terrible gang murders, recruiting their young sons, people just being murdered for being in the wrong place, the Mara Salvatrucha, like all that. El Salvador was just a terrible, terrible place. Bukele came in and rounded up all the gang members essentially, and has, for the most part, from what I can tell, stabilized the country. Now, there are a lot of journalists, NGOs who have some problems with the way he did that, because there are probably some people in those jails who will never get out, who probably don't deserve to be there. And there are some other concerns. I think the US government has talked about some concerns about El Salvador slipping into a dictatorship. But for the first time in my entire lifetime, I feel like El Salvador is somewhere that I could go visit. Like, it would be safe enough that I could go visit friends. I'm really, really curious to see, just to kind of see it for myself. And I have struggled with, like, obviously I am a believer of human rights. I believe that when the government stops respecting people's human rights, we can have a lot of problems. But I also feel like the people that I knew in El Salvador, like, their 13 to 15-year-old boys were being either murdered or recruited into gangs. And so I don't know that I should be telling the government of El Salvador or the people of El Salvador where they should be taking, like somebody's going to suffer, right? So is it going to be our 15-year-old boys, or is it going to be these guys in the prison? I don't know.
I think anytime you're trying to make changes, you have to weigh the stuff, and you don't know that change yet. You have to kind of wait, because history kind of tells us some stuff, but we just kind of keep muddling through. And I think, absolutely, I think it becomes that thing of just caring for other people. People are all human beings at the end of the day, no matter what country you are from, no matter what we are, social status, race, any of those things. We are all human beings at the end of the month, at the end of the day. And we all want the same things. We just want to live our lives.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm so happy you're doing this. You seem like you have a passion for it. Now you've moved into GAL. Look at you.
Yeah.
And you have to fill us in on how El Salvador goes. We're
Yes.
excited to hear about that as well. Thank you so much for being on and maybe educating some people, because I think that sometimes we just are bombarded with so much information that we don't really understand or know. So
Yeah.
very, very
Absolutely.
happy about it.
Well, thank you for having me. This was
Yeah.
really fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
And as always, we hope that you guys have a wonderful week and follow us on. Gee, she's forgetting her job.
TwoGirlsInAPod.com. You can subscribe and get a notification whenever we post a new episode. You can also follow Adventures of Two Girls in a Pod Life's Journey on YouTube. And
We're on
anywhere
Facebook.
you get your podcasts, you can tune in to Two Girls in a Pod Life's Journey.
So like, subscribe, I don't know, send
Follow.
emojis, whatever it is y'all do out there.
Say hello.
Yes, we'd appreciate it. And once again, as always, thank you so much for joining us, and we will be back next week.